There's a lot of buzz going around in the holistic health space of lead contaminating your salt. Brands like Celtic salt, Redmond sea salt have been under some scrutiny lately because independent testers have gone ahead and tested these brands for their lead content and found them to be rather high, which has obviously alarmed the whole health community, and that's probably why you're here. So in this video, I want to give you my take on heavy metals in salt. This is going to be a no fear approach. So I want to kind of paint a picture here for you first as to how these independent testers decided to go about their testing and ultimately come to the conclusion that something like Celtic sea salt is not safe to consume. A lot of the rhetoric comes from an account called Unsafe Mama, who has a very popular blog where she tests everything for their lead content, and she's very anti-lead, rightfully so in a lot of ways, but she essentially explains that she believes that the lead and the gray color that's in something like a Selena Celtic sea salt are actually added to salt by the manufacturer in the harvesting process. So she believes this comes from the clay beds that the salt is dried and harvested from, believing that these clay beds are actually contaminated with lead of themselves. So she thinks they don't look natural. She says they're man-made clay beds, and this is all part of the Celtic salt harvesting process. That's actually why this salt brand in particular tests high for lead. So this is allegedly where these high levels of lead are coming from. If you're already overwhelmed, at the end I'm going to share with you how to choose a salt brand based off of all of this information. So stay tuned because I'm going to explain that. I first want to start by saying that this is kind of the debate when it comes to any natural product. This lead is a naturally occurring substance in nature. It shows up in our garden vegetables because our soils have lead in them. Particularly things like potatoes and other root vegetables will have higher levels of lead, and arguably even higher than a daily dose of some of this Celtic sea salt. But what we're talking about here is clay. So if we're really going to kind of get specific to this brand, the reason why it's contaminated supposedly is because of the clay beds. And as we know, clay functions like a binder, and it does that in the ocean, so it will pull metals. And this actually is kind of important to note because something I learned from Becky Plotner was that bentonite clay in a bath even has actually caused people to have reactions similar to those of heavy metal toxicity. She actually steers away from that type of thing and towards something like a diatomaceous earth instead, because it doesn't function in nature to bind to the elements. So Becky Plotner's idea there is actually pretty similar to the reasoning behind Lead Safe Mama, is that they don't want to come into contact with things that have these binding properties or the binders themselves, because in essence, those would actually transfer the metals that were previously bound to that binder. So clay being a binder, but bentonite clay also being a form of clay that binds to metals in the ocean. So this is actually a similar debate to the zeolite. There's a couple different brands, one that's more highly processed, one that's less highly processed. It has a binding effect to these metals, and so people are concerned that if it's the most natural form, that it would actually function in its most natural form and have metals carrying with it. But that's besides the point. What I've come to is that lead is a naturally occurring substance, and it really depends on how it's being used and really the state of our body at that time. So I'm going to kind of move on to my next point, which is that the goal is not to actually avoid heavy metal exposure altogether, that's nearly impossible. That's not my primary goal. Now, I'm not saying that like I'm going to go consuming large amounts of the most highly contaminated salt or highly contaminated food that has lead in it. I'm not going to go do that. But my primary goal is actually to get my detox pathways working, get my gut microbiome functioning into a healthy place where my body can actually start to do that detoxification work on its own. So I'm not fearful of these small, really, really small levels of lead or any type of heavy metal in our environment, but rather I'm more concerned with the detox process that's going on, making sure my detox pathways are functioning, making sure that I have a robust immune system. So you might be saying, but Selena, I consume so much Celtic sea salt on a daily basis, and this iodine protocol has me drinking so much salt water. I'm going to refer you to my heavy metal chelation video because I kind of go through the different types of chelators, and I think that will be really helpful. There is one particular chelator on the market that technically it's not on the market, and I'm not going to name it in this video, that specifically targets lead in the body. And I think that when you pair a really effective, very safe heavy metal chelator alongside these other protocols that incorporate, garden grown food and lots of healthy mineral salts, you don't actually have to be in that state of deep concern all the time. So now I'm going to move to my third point, which is that perfectionism is a killer, you guys. It is so much more stressful on your nervous system to be fearful of every single little thing that you consume in these trace amounts than it is to really just take care of your well-being from the inside out with a gut first approach and really work those detox pathways. Like, I really think we could get into the nitty-gritty details of so much of our food processing nowadays, and it could be very depressing, and it probably is very depressing because our soils are contaminated. Our food processing isn't perfect, but I think it's honestly pretty hard to find one that is. Now, I know that there's a spectrum here, and I'm going to get into that when I share like how to find the best salt. But at the end of the day, we are all under constraints of our budgets, our lifestyles, what we can reasonably afford, and learn how to source well. So I don't believe in being stressed out about this. I actually think it can be doing way more harm than good. That being said, what are you looking for in a salt? Let's say if Mama would argue that you don't want a salt that is mined for this reason, that she believes that it will accumulate more trace levels of heavy metal. Again, I do think this is kind of debatable, but what is not debatable is that you want to find salt that has a diverse array of minerals. So as diverse in type of minerals as you can possibly have is going to be the best for you. So brands like Baja Gold are pretty diverse, and even brands like Jacobson Health Co. is very diverse, and that one actually falls under Unsafe Mama's recommendation in that it is not mined in clay. You also want non-iodized salt. When you see at the grocery store iodized salt, that's typically considered table salt. It basically means that it was processed to include an inabsorbable amount and type of iodine. I've been into iodine in other videos, but easy for your body to absorb, nor is it healthy to have certain minerals stripped away and added into salt. The processing of that is not good for your body. So you're looking for diversity and you're looking for non-iodized salt. And beyond that, I do believe it's a spectrum, and it comes down to how these salts were mined, and you can be the judge of that, because at the end of the day, I personally still do use something like Celtic sea salt, and I really think the healing journey is so bio-individual. I don't know if you have really high levels of lead in your body, and you might get stimulated by having like large amounts of the salt that has higher lead. I think a safe way to kind of manage these different brands and kind of even manage your budget would be to rotate salts. I heard that recently from one of my focus group members, and I thought that was a great idea, just to have a consistent rotation of the types and brands of salt that you're using, within the criteria that I just mentioned. So no, I do not follow everything that Unsafe Mama says, but it's something to take into consideration, and I don't think that she's wrong to say that there are high levels of lead or higher levels of lead in something like a Celtic sea salt when you compare it to the other ones on the market. But you also want to compare the other factors that she's not mentioning, which are the mineral compositions and whether or not they're iodized. So if you still have questions, or you're maybe concerned about a specific brand, this is a great thing to bring into our community. I just opened Wholeness Hub, which is a free community where we talk about all things like this, and there are free Q&As every Saturday at 10 a.m. So be sure to check out the link in the description for that. At the end of the day, you guys, your body needs salt. So don't stress. And check out this video on heavy metals, where I share all of my best chelation strategies that can help you to take control of your health. Thanks for watching.